Welcome everybody to the live stream. Let me turn the lights on here. All right. Hello everybody. Welcome, welcome. Hey guys, by the way, if you won from the giveaway last time and you haven't emailed me, make sure to do. I'll read the list to you guys again so you know who won. Actually, maybe is there a way I can put up like this photo here? I'll put it up. Giveaway winner. Hello, hello, welcome everybody. Welcome. I do speak Chinese. 大家好，大家好. Let me. I'm trying to. Here, so if you won the giveaway last time, make sure to email me, okay? Because I haven't received all of the emails. I did get the merchandise, but I just haven't gotten all of the emails yet. So make sure you do that. False Prophet asks, what do you think about the CCP and Indonesia relationship? I don't know specifically about that, but actually here, there's an interesting article that I was reading today. Vietnam protest, China. I saw this on Twitter today, but Jada doesn't let me watch the show, but I'm gonna watch it anyways. That's funny. Vietnam spokesperson. No, yeah, so this one. Let me share with you guys. If you guys don't know, so China for a very long time has been trying to put Vietnam as their sort of like their own side of the South China Sea, but recently Vietnam seems to have turned, right? They were protesting what China is doing in the South China Sea with their illegal survey vessels, which is interesting because now, right, you look at the Philippines, you look at Japan, you look at Taiwan, you look at now with Vietnam, China's losing a lot of their control in the South China Sea, and it's all because of their own doing. Similarly, Vietnam also pulled the movie Abominable from basically showing in like inside this animation film they feature disputed territories with China. So like the relationship with Vietnam is rocky, which in my view is very interesting where things are going. For a long time we thought that Vietnam was going to side with China, but seemingly like they're moving to that direction of the Philippines. Thanks for the congrats on 1 mil. Thank you, Freddie Renzo. Ang asks, what's the topic for today's stream, David? I don't really have anything planned. It was just talking with you guys just to chat a little bit. Sound is a little bit low. Camille says, "How do you live? Did you live in China? How many years?" I lived till I was about 11. where is Danny asks, is there anything that can be done informationally to avoid China attack on Taiwan? Yeah, so that's an interesting question because one of the focus for, I can show you this. One of the focus of China is something called, so Taiwan. So basically, what China does with information on Taiwan is that they disseminate a lot of false information about the island and the democratic government there, right? So, in order for people to lose faith and confidence in their own government on Taiwan, so that, for example, they can elect people who are, say, alternative to what the current government is doing, right? And China really calls it a cognitive warfare plan, and it's a very comprehensive plan. But basically, it involves the military coercion tactics. It also involves the use of propaganda, physically turning people in Taiwan against their own countries, demoralization, right? Just not believing in your system. All of these, like, basically it's to, and a lot of this is directed by the military side, but also a lot of it is directed by the government. And if you really think about what cognitive warfare does, is using propaganda like radio broadcasts to and deception through dissemination of disinformation. But even though it's not a recent phenomenon, it's something that they use to enhance the combat effectiveness of these information warfare, right? It is a military tactic. So to answer your question, how information works is you have to have a combat, like the opposite information coming through on the same level of frequency in terms of, like, we're talking like the amount and the strength of it that could combat the lies put out by the Chinese Communist Party. Archie Sharma asks, what do you think about China selling US bonds? I haven't read up on that. China selling US bonds. Beijing sold, how much did they sell? 53.3 billion worth of US Treasury and agency bonds from its stockpile. So what this sounds like to me is actually trying to convert those into foreign exchange currency, so into dollars. Because when you're selling it, you're sold in the dollar. And China's really, like, they're drying up on their foreign currency reserves. So I think this is a way for them to try to get some cash. So one of the things that China does is they've always tried to leverage, like, the exchange rate between the dollar and the yuan, right? In exchange for a bigger trade. Like, you could say that the difference between the dollar and the yuan is what creates that relationship of trading with China and the United States, with other currencies, but the dollar and the yuan is like the most common one we see. Right, that's why you can, how much a dollar is worth in the yuan means how many things you can buy in China, and so they've always tried to keep it, like, the exchange rate quite high. So for every dollar you can get like 7 to 8 yuan, and which means for every dollar you can buy more things in China. But China at one point, like, they ran out of foreign currency reserves. I think this I covered it, I believe, starting like 2 years ago or last year. And they claim that they have a lot of dollars on their hand, but they really don't. Jose asks, what is your belief when it comes to ancient China? If you're talking about, like, how people are, I think, like, Chinese culture throughout its history, they have a lot of teachings on morals and on being a good person, and really just developing, like, a interpersonal relationship built on, like, trusts. There's, like, a saying in China which is, like, back in the days, right, of course, before the CCP came on, they say that, if I promised you something, I will go to, like, the world's end to get it done. And so, like, compared to today's China, which is built on deceptions and lies and cutting corners, people back in the days were really about upholding those like values of trust, promises, etc. And so that's just already different. And ancient China really believed in things like repercussions, right? If I do things well, I will be rewarded. If I do things poorly, then I will be punished. And so obviously that's also another thing that has been erased in China today. John Riches asks, what do you think China's next step will be to try to attempt to restore their economy? To be honest with you, there isn't much to do for them right now because for the last 2 years, they've tried to do everything, right? They've tried to introduce policies to benefit the private sector. They've tried to rescue the real estate sector. They've tried to introduce policies that would essentially subsidize like smaller businesses, subsidize state businesses. None of that's done anything so far to move the market. Again, because consumer confidence. If I just search China's economy right now for any sort of news, like right now, the biggest focus is still China's export, right? It's the only part, or you could say like the slim light in its dark and gloomy economy that still works. But that's built on like things like EVs, on solar panel batteries, etc. So that's the only thing that's looking bright for China. Everything else, like domestically especially, is looking horrible. So to answer your question, John, there's really not much that they can do to recover. Because fundamentally, like I always say this, I'm repeating myself at this point, it's really just about the government. And unless there's a fundamental change in the government, the economy's just not going to bounce back. Tense Gamer asks, what do you think about the Daega Dam construction in Tibet? So this is similar to the Three Gorges Dam in China too. The problem is when you build dams, because when this Three Gorges Dam was built, it was supposed to be this grand project that supposed to save China, right? But over the years, what it's done is it's caused huge problems. And so when they tried to build another dam, and also along the Yangtze River, I think it's not going to be good because a lot of time, like if you really read about the details, which I haven't read too much about, um, I think what they usually do is they completely ignore the local demands for what's actually needed, and they don't really care to survey, like the villages or the towns around the dam, or where it's going to be relocated to, and they just kind of do it, right? Because they say, well, it's part of infrastructure, and we can spend money and we can do these things. None of it's ever like in consideration with improving the local area. Let me see. Yeah, so this one has led to protests. Okay, so I see the problem here. So this project will submerge and affect at least 2 villages and 6 monasteries. Yeah, so when they try to control the stream of water, it's going to flood downstream, right? And unfortunately, because the CCP doesn't care much about religion and religious establishments of the Tibetan Buddhism and just Tibetan culture, they will probably just ignore anything that has to do with preserving history, right? All these ancient temples or these towns, like it doesn't really matter to them. So they would just do whatever they think is necessary. Phobos Damos says, do you think that the CCP are watching the stream? Probably. Kane Engel asks, what do you think of the BRICS? I think it's a joke. The one that China wants to lead and dominate, I think it's a joke. Who do you believe in current Chinese parliament would be a better replacement for Xi? I don't think there's anyone right now that's when you say that, hey, this person is doing better, having them than Xi Jinping on is going to be better. I don't think there's any option for that right now, because anybody else that comes into power, I would think that it might even be worse in some sense, because you never really know, right? Everybody always talks about how Xi Jinping is like this really brutal dictator. It's doing all these crazy things or whatever, but that's relative to what we know, right? So think about it. Like, I'm not trying to excuse his behaviors, but I'm just saying that if you really think about what Xi Jinping is doing, you're only comparing it to what was happening before, because this is so much worse. But does this mean that he's the worst of it all? Probably not, because if you consider him and Mao killed like 80 million Chinese people, right? Deng Xiaoping did the 1989 Tiananmen Square massacre. And so in some way, shape, or form, every leader in the CCP has done something worse, right? So it's not like Xi Jinping being replaced is going to suddenly solve the issue. The issue is not Xi Jinping. The issue is the Chinese Communist Party, and that's their system that needs to be overhauled. And so it's a breeding ground for trouble and a breeding ground for problems. So it doesn't really matter if it's Xi or somebody else that's in power. Eventually, they're going to become something worse. Mike asks, can you please answer the question in your community post? Which question? Yeah, I don't know which question you're talking about. Let me look it up. BMX asks, what's your opinion on United Nations? China has capitalized on their hold of the United Nations to like basically hijack it as a system that they can rule under. So they like everything they justify their cause is based on how the United Nations is doing so and so, right? But we obviously understand like the United Nations is not really doing their parts. Like they never criticized or led any sort of criticism into the virus coming out of China. They never really done anything that really helps to stop like the human rights persecutions in China. And they've turned a blind eye. I once interviewed a whistleblower from the UN that says, when it comes to topics like Falun Gong, the United Nations, like human rights part of it, would stop talking about it because the CCP, China has like asked them to not mention anything like that. Mike asks, is your channel anything other than China? It's not. Yamis asks, what happened in Tiananmen Square? Do you want the real answer or you want the satirical answer? Because nothing happened at Tiananmen Square. Tense Gamer asks, what do you think about Chinese sending Tibetan kids into colonial schools? Support from exiled Tibetan. My family resides in Tibet and my nephew has been sent to colonial schools. Well, fundamentally, brainwashing people is the ultimate goal, right? If you can erase their identity, because if you really think about it, what makes any culture unique is their association to their identity and to their culture. And when you send somebody into these colonial schools, the attempt is to sever that. And so it's not a unique thing that the CCP does. It's something that you've seen it in residential schools in Canada with different groups. You've seen that happen, and the fundamental goal is the same: is to erase their unique identity. And in doing so, they become just like one of us or one of the other people, right? Because really, if you think about China, they have 56 minority or ethnic population or groups, right? but the Han is the biggest. What they do over the years is to erase the differences between those minority groups, like the ethnic groups, and that of the Han. Not because they say that, you know, everybody's Chinese and it's because, you know, we're going to benefit you, but because they want the Han population to over time assimilate other ethnic groups. And because that's like, to the CCP, the more uniform something is, the more control they can exert. So none of this is done out of their good graciousness, right? Wu Mi asks, just curious, how are you safe from the CCP? Sorry if I am offending. No, I'm pretty sure half of the reason is because they don't speak English, or they don't know how to deal with the English channels. That's my guess. I don't know, actually. Danny Domschlax asks, what do you think will happen to China after Russia loses in Ukraine? Well, so China won't let Russia lose because Putin and Xi are on the same boat, because they're together on this path of trying to usurp the world order, right? The way of life that as we know it. So if one of them loses, the legitimacy of that attempt is gone, and they lose any sort of credibility in saying that, hey, we are the better version, as they claim that they're the better version of the world order run by China and Russia. So they're on the same boat, and China would never ask Russia to give up, because directly, right? Because China's wanting to do something over Taiwan, they need Russia in every way possible to sustain this fight. So I really don't think that, unless something dramatic happens, like if Putin dies or something like that, I don't think Russia will stop, and they're going to try everything they can to continue the war. Sahil Mud asks, what do you think about India versus China? There was a crazy video I just saw. Maybe I can show you guys. I don't know if this is a new video or not, but I just saw this today, actually. Yeah, here. Oops. So just for context, the people on top, they're the Indian border troops, and then the people on the bottom are the Chinese border troops, and they're throwing rocks at each other. Because during in the border clash, they use clubs and rocks and shields instead of guns, because they have a treaty that basically says we're not supposed to use any firearms. It's just crazy. Yeah, I think this is from... Okay, so it is from June 8th, so it's recent today. Because the thing is, like, China versus India, I think after the first time that the border clash happened, which I think was 2020 or 2021, like in recent years, right? The relationship just rapidly deteriorated. It hasn't recovered from that since. So it's going crazy. It's really interesting, because if you consider what India has done since this border clash situation, which is still ongoing, by the way, every single day, is that I would say they've done the most measures, like banning Chinese apps, banning Chinese games in India, or I guess you would say on the app stores in the Indian version of iPhones like Apple and Samsung and Google, which no other country has done after that, right? Like India was very decisive in their getting back at China, right? So they just banned, things like PUBG Mobile, TikTok, etc. Like no other country has done that yet, and India was able to do it afterwards of the border clash. Crooked Main says it looks like they don't see you as much of a threat to me. Who knows? Yeah, maybe because the Chinese speaking language YouTubers are much more of an immediate danger to the party. TD Nato asks, "Hey man, is there any good place to live in China? Like, I love the culture, but I don't want to go to the bad parts. Like how? What do you mean by bad parts? Like violent, or you're talking, like politically bad?" Sabri Rastrina Driana says, "Dang, they're going medieval." Yeah, the stick and stone fights. North Korea. World War IV battle be like. Yeah, like I was just always joking that the best ways for governments around the world to settle their differences is do like a cage match, right? Pick your best fighter. It can be anybody. It doesn't have there's no weight class, there's no weigh-ins, there's no restrictions, right? But it's just you pick your best fighter in a one versus one cage match, like MMA style, obviously. No knives, no swords or anything like that, but just fists and you know use your arms and legs, just best of one, and just decide your differences there in a cage match, global cage match. You can even do a World Series on it. John Riches asks, "Do you think more countries should boycott Chinese apps and products, etc.?" Well, I think they should. Obviously, some countries rely on Chinese products like WeChat to do business, but I think if you consider the risks and reward, I think if your country can sustain it, obviously you should ban it. Like countries like the U.S., India, some European countries, the UK, Japan, etc. I don't think they need to rely on Chinese apps. But Chinese apps have a very interesting dynamic with the consumer population, which is that, for example, games are very interesting. TikTok is very interesting, like for consumers, and shopping experiences like Temu and Shein. So there's a lot of reliance in that aspect as well. Danny says, "Do you think China's nukes are at working conditions? I think Japan and South Korea is getting their own." Yeah, I really have my doubts about Chinese military readiness. I don't know if their nukes are working though. Jose says, "Ip Man." Yeah, yeah, just everyone sent their own martial artist. I wonder, because the thing is, like, there's so many of those videos of Chinese like fighters losing in the MMA cage match, right? Like, because they always send people like a monk or some kung fu guy, but those people, for one, they're not really trained by authentic kung fu masters, because guess what, all those authentic ones, martial art was something that the Cultural Revolution also destroyed. So like if you were a martial artist back in the day, you couldn't practice your kung fu because like that was considered superstitious and all that. So today in China, there's really not a lot of authentic martial art teachings. Maybe there's some hidden ones like Wing Chun in southern China, in like Guangzhou, which is what Ip Man, he did. But other than that, you don't see a lot of Chinese martial art. Like today, jujitsu, taekwondo, karate, like all these different fighting styles are much more practical than Chinese kung fu. Fire Farmer says they would find some guy with 4 arms, 8 feet tall. Every country all at once find giants. Yeah, it just turns into a bio soldier development program, like Resident Evil Nemesis style. Being asked, did you ever got threatened by the Chinese government? No, not yet. A joke I like to tell about Zoom. China invented COVID to sell Zoom. It's so crazy because Zoom really got popular after COVID started. Omar Yusuf Kamal says, do they still imprison Muslims in East Turkmenistan? Turkmenistan? They do. They still have concentration camps there. Yurikov says, hello, will you make a cover on the Chinese Navy blocking Philippines Navy from providing Philippine soldiers medical aid? If you're talking about the Thomas Shoal, like with what's happening around the Philippines, I've done videos in the past. I haven't done them recently, though. Mr. Fox says we shouldn't blame the people of China or Russia for their predicament. In my opinion, they often literally just don't know any better and don't understand how important freedom and the pursuit of happiness are. Yeah, I agree with that because people in China don't have experience with, because if you really think about, for Russia, I think partially too, because until the 1910, 1920s, they were ruled under a monarchy. So that's why, a lot of these Eastern Asian countries embraced communism, was that they had a much shorter history with dealing with a democratic system, or in the case of the United States, a republic. They've lived under a monarchy, imperial rule for so long that when the communists came in, they're like, hey, by the way, we can rile up your resentment towards the monarchy or towards the system and offer you this alternative where, you, the peasants or the proletariat class, has everything, right? It was a pipe dream for people, for most people today. They realized we were never going to get there. And you still have the elite 1% in communist countries, like the Russian oligarchs, the Chinese red families. They're still there. Like nothing really changed. Today, they're not called the royalties anymore. They're called, oligarchs or red families. But still, the same fundamental things still exist. There's still class differences, all of those things. And you can't really blame people for saying that, well, we wanted something different. So when people don't have experience with an alternative system, they don't realize what they're missing. So they don't know what freedom of speech is. They don't know what's the right to rule, right to vote, the religious freedom, all of these things. They've never experienced it. So they just think what they have so far is the best. Kant Co says, bro, your knowledge and English accent is awesome. Any tips on and tricks on improving English language? Just talking, I think. Vader says, hey, yo, finally caught you live. I'm a big fan. Can you send me your address and times when you're alone on a dark alley or something? Yeah, so I'm usually walking alone at night into dark alleys in the all the time. So I'll private message you my address, and you can find me there. So, regarding the Philippine situation, I think China has at this point given up on relationship with the Philippines, at least for the next 2 to 3 years, because of how different Marcos Jr. has done things compared to Duterte. So I think at this point they just use coercion now, harassment. I really don't see the tension being lowered in the Philippines with China. And I think it's only going to get worse. So, like, if you're asking me what's to do now, I think it's to get more people in the Philippines aware that they need to take actions, whether that's, electing officials in their local area or just simply letting the politicians know that they're concerned about China, and they really need to enact a lot more policies that would safeguard the sovereignty of the Philippines, which I think most of the case would involve working with the US and others. Danny asks, is there a pro-Hamas propaganda on Chinese TV? Yeah, there's pro-Hamas propaganda like all over China. Think about it, the Taliban and Hamas are friends of China. And I think a lot of their leaderships were trained in Chinese United Front schools. So they were trained operatives by the CCP. Vader says, I'm no communist. I'm a big fan of our visionary leader Xi Jinping and want to spread his love and affection throughout the world. Oh, man. How long have I had this channel? I had it for about 2 years. A little bit over 2 years. I can't remember. I think a little bit or maybe less than 2 years, actually. Yeah, this is what we've gone through, just caveman style. Bricks. So I always say this, right? Like Crooked Man, your comment just now about the U.S. A lot of this is about choice. The difference between who gets to run the political office and the government in the U.S. and other countries is up to the choice of the voters. The difference is that we at least have a choice, but when it comes to the difference between China and the rest of the world is that they don't get to make a choice. And I think fundamentally it really just boils down to that. They don't even get to make a choice. Vader says, nah, man, jokes aside, I watch many channels. Did balloons just pop out of the background? How did that happen? Watch many channels like China Observer and all, but how do you get information out of China if it's so highly censored? A lot of times it's leaks, but also a lot of people, like, they are knowledgeable in the sense that they live through the experience. And they understand when things are being reported in China, they can kind of like sift through the information and come up with a lot of analysis. So that's one part. The other part is that even despite all of the censorship, people have found ways to, get videos out to the outside world. There's different like chat rooms. There's different methods to get information. Don't press on my channel. Watch what you say, my friend. Betraying your country is a very punishable and shameful crime. Well, China's not my country anymore. So, and also, I think the best way to do better for your country is to be able to voice your criticisms and voice your opinions about the country. I think when you don't even have that being allowed in China, that's when things are shameful. The most criminal thing in the world is to say that your own citizens, who, by the way, put you into power in the first place, no longer get to tell you that, you are to serve the people there and not the people serving you. I think this is a very fundamental logical thing with China, right? They say that without the CCP, there's no new China, or without the CCP, there's no China. That's fundamentally a logical flaw, because it is people in any country, it is people that put the governments into power. It is people that delegate a few politicians to do the work for them because they have more things to do, like taking care of their families. And so for them to say that, oh, the people must serve the politicians, that is a huge issue. And then that's how dictatorships are created. Artem Radigan says, David, what are your thoughts on the cooperation of Russian and Chinese propaganda? They've signed several agreements recently. How do they cooperate? Well, for one, basically, China and Russia have this love for each other. So you will never see anti-Russian propaganda, anti-Russian content on China, or the vice versa. And they've always built the so-called brotherhood, even though, during a certain points back when the Soviet Union and the CCPs, I think in the 70s, had the Sino-Soviet split, late 60s, 70s, the relationship really deteriorated. But today they brush aside all their differences, including land disputes between Russia and China. And so the cooperation for propaganda is really just saying that both countries are like brothers and that they share the same sort of destiny in that they have to overcome the so-called Western oppression, right? And so you'll almost see this like simultaneous promotion of a Russia and China united sort of ways of running the world all the time. What are your hobbies, David? I think you're just gonna watch funny, cringe China videos. My hobbies, I watch a lot of drama, like on Netflix and otherwise. And I used to work out a lot, but I don't do that anymore. So basically, outside of work, I just hang out with my family and all that. History Nerd says, David, how do you feel about the close relationship between North Korea and the CCP? I actually still have my reservation about what Kim wants to do. I, in some ways, feel like Kim doesn't want to be the proxy of China, but they obviously, North Korea relies on China heavily for its dwindling economy or the any sort of production it has. So in that sense, like Kim will always beg China for stuff. But I also feel like we've seen this with Trump and the talk between North Korea, South Korea, and the U.S. I think you could make progress with Kim Jong Un, which is something that you can't do with Xi Jinping. Ray asks, what made you start this channel and why in English, not in simplified Chinese? Good work though, because not a lot of Western people not understand the human rights crimes in China. Well, I think there's a vacuum in the English space about countering Chinese propaganda. So that's one of the reasons why I started this. Corvus Corax says, if the CCP fails, how do you think it will happen? I think it wouldn't happen like you suddenly hear news about the CCP collapsing. I think it will be fast. It will be a while, but it will be fast. It will happen similar to how we saw the Soviet Union collapse, in my view. But it would take much higher. Like the threshold for reaching that point is much higher than the Soviet Union. Because one of the things that the Soviet Union in its later days under Gorbachev happened, like the reason why there was a shift was because of two policies, right? There was the perestroika. What was the other one called? There was perestroika, stoika, and glasnost. That was it. So this was this, right? There was the policy or practice of restructuring or reforming the economic and political system. And then glasnost was open consultative government and wider dissemination of information, which both things are not happening in China. Because if you really think about what's happening since Xi Jinping took over, is he reduced the amount of economic opening and reform. He reduced the never really happened political reform. He reduced so-called consultative government and wider dissemination of information. Everything has been decreased since Xi Jinping came into power. And even under Deng Xiaoping, who ran on this reform and opening up, we saw what happens when students tried to protest and tried to ask for real change. That's when Deng Xiaoping opened fire on the students. So really, for the threshold of how the CCP will fall, it's going to be much higher than that of the Soviet Union, because Xi Jinping isn't Gorbachev, and I think he basically took down the people that were pseudo Gorbachev, like former Premier Li Keqiang, and those of the so-called reform era. And so there's really, you can't bank on somebody like Gorbachev in China. Atharv Agarwal says border clash video is a year old. I see. Okay, so it's not today then. Jisa Zurami says, finally caught up a David Zhang stream. I have to ask, where'd you get all your suits? You always dress so dapper. You're a very handsome young man. Thank you. I got my suits at some sample sale in New York. They're like, I don't even know what brands they are. And some of the other ones from, I had them for a while now. I just don't wear them as much now because it's a summer, and also I'm doing a lot of stuff at home. So usually when I go do them in the studio, I'll have them. I think they're, I don't remember what brands they are actually. Living the dream. Where do you live, David? I live around, I live in New York State. Vader says, yeah, man, he's right. Your channel does give some proper corporation news outlet vibe. That's what I don't want it to be. I don't want it to be like a news channel. I want it to be more like a personal channel. David C asks, would you start a channel in Mandarin with the same content you make now, like the Mandarin version of each video you upload? The thing with the Mandarin version is that if you look at the Mandarin YouTubers, it's a lot more complicated in the ways they explain things, and I can't. I'm really not, like, I'm really about kind of like the how do you say this? Like, a lot of stuff I find it more interesting to explain to English speaking because people don't know about it. But in China, you know all about it. So all the things, it's just a boring, good old, analysis or commentary. It's kind of boring to me, but we'll see. Maybe. MD Panda asks, just a question about Chinese culture. Who has the best commentary on Tao Te Ching? I have the translated version, but I understand nothing. Even I don't really understand much of it, but I don't know. A lot of these Chinese culture stuff, it really is lost because today it's hard to find like real teachings of it. Yeah, I don't know. I can't help you with that one. Danny says, you said China won't let Russia lose, but if the allies of Ukraine will give enough jets and stuff, China won't be able to save Russia. These decisions will take time, but eventually it will happen. We'll see. I personally think that China is, at this stage at least, is fully on board to supplying Russia with arms. And we know how long those proxy warfares can last. So at this point, I mean, based on the current situation, China's obviously not going to let them lose. And I think the point here is that they will try to stall it, right, until at least 2027, when China, as long as there's distractions, it's going to make it easier for the CCP to do something over Taiwan. Thank you, Crooked Main, for saying that these lives help a lot, make the channel more personal. You're still my favorite news outlet, though. Thanks. Thank you. Vader says, because of the country highly dependent on export, 3 trillion plus and a low consumption power, the 18 trillion plus number looks a bit far-fetched. I don't know what numbers you're talking about, but I did a video on how China's latest, like, Q1 data for 2024 is basically all fake. Yeah, Ray says we should interview with Why Tojala and Toronto Big Face. You guys can either talk in English or add English subtitles. We should really shed some light on heroes. Yeah, no, they're great, and they're really doing a lot the for China content. Jesus says, have to ask, how would you compare the Chinese government to the Japanese government? People always compare the two people. I always believe they have some similar Asian cultures. So, Japan, and if you guys don't know this, Japan was very, like, their entire current cultural and customs and everything, right, was heavily inspired by the Tang Dynasty during the 600s or the 700s. But basically, Japan, they really wanted to get this culture because they were so close to China, right? They really wanted to get this cultural side of things for China because the Tang Dynasty was like the pinnacle of cultural and social development in China during its history. So they sent a lot of people to China to study from anything like music, dressing, how they dress, to culture, to language, to writing, to construction. Like a lot of the Japanese culture and their buildings today, right, come from the Tang Dynasty. So they're very heavily inspired by China. So in history, I would call them like a younger brother of China. Fortunately, today Japan has preserved like a lot more of traditional Chinese cultures and values and customs, traditions, all of these things, and Taiwan as well. Even Korea to the extent that's been lost in mainland China. So visiting Japan, a lot of times you see more Chinese elements than actual like Chinese tourist spots, because Japan respected the culture that they received from China, and they really lived along with it. Obviously, now they've grown to be something unique with their language, with the way that things are, customs, etc. But back in the days, like Japan was so interested in Chinese culture that they studied in China for so long and they took it back to Japan and they preserved it, which is I'm very glad they did. Um, Random asks, my brother will have a Chinese exchange student visit him next month. Is it a good idea to expose the student to what's really going on, or will he be in danger once he returns? I think it's a good idea to tell him about it and just, chatting with him about stuff. Today, the younger students have a much easier time accessing, climbing over the firewall. So maybe I think it's good to discuss with them and see what they say. And, you can slowly kind of introduce things to him. But yeah, it's a good idea because I think this is an opportunity for them to really understand the world outside of China. Viram Singh says, "What is China's posture regarding India from your point of view? Because as far as I have picked some geopolitical signal, there are some negotiation regarding T1 and POJK. I'm not so sure what those two places are, but I think occasionally you have a lot of I think fundamentally, like I said before, China and India are in different places, and they will continue to be in different places, given the fact that now India is so much more aligned with the West." Zerx says no special costume this time. Was looking forward to see the She cosplay again. Yeah, maybe I'll put it on sometime soon. Jisa, thanks again for the comment. David C says, does China still have COVID regulations? If so, where and how are they being implemented? People are still getting sick from COVID in China. The government just says they're not from COVID. So if somebody literally went to a hospital today and asked the doctors, what do I have? They will say anything from like seasonal flu to a respiratory virus to like RSV, to like anything but COVID, basically. Because there's an official notice saying that you cannot call it COVID anymore. But COVID is still killing people in China, like still getting people sick in China. It's just they can't call it COVID. It's you got sick from something else. Expose him without being condescending. You don't want him to lose face. You just want to have an eye-opening experience. Also be prepared to answer tough questions. I'm not sure what that's about. There can't be two great powers from the same region. They will have a war eventually. Yeah, well, I guess history tells us that's the case. I think at most in one continent, you can have maybe one or two great powers. And in modern history, you really only have one great powers around the world, right? Like it went from the British Empire to the American, just America, the United States, and you've had challengers. You really don't have, like today, there's really no way for China to compete for number one. I think they realize that too. It's their dream to do it, but at the end of the day, you really can't compete against the US at this current stage. Who knows about 10 years, 20 years, but at the current place, nobody can compete. Vader, what did you ask? Greenhouse Aquatic asks, do you think China is afraid of Trump winning, and who do you wish to win? So with me, I always said that, like, if it was just pure, like, not American politics, pure China wise, I think China would rather have Biden than Trump, right? Okay, forget all those like rhetorics about, him joining TikTok and stuff, which is, I think it's kind of dumb that Trump is on TikTok because it's literally a national security threat. But I think if you really look, just rationally look at the Trump era policies, Biden has continued 80 to 90% of the Trump era policies. Why do you think that's the case? Because it actually works. One thing I just have now, the Biden administration has done some amazing stuff when it comes to China, right? They put up more trade barriers for like tariffs. They push out, like things on semiconductors. They've provided some really good stuff. And but the thing is, like, they come at such a slow speed. And a lot of times it's not very drastic, right? For example, with the tariffs they recently put on Chinese EVs and solar panel and batteries, it only affects, I think, what, like $8 billion or $80 billion worth of trade goods. Let me look it up, what the actual numbers are. Biden tariff. Raises tariff, chips. Does it say? Where is it? No, this one doesn't tell us. Yeah, okay, so new measures only affects $18 billion in imported goods. So $18 billion is like the total amount of trades from China in 2023 is $427 billion. So that's like so little in comparison to what the overall imports are. So like these measures are nice for the political purpose, but they're not really the effective measures, right? So from a pure China perspective, I think they'd rather have Biden. Vader says 18 trillion GDP number they put out every year. Is there any chance of it being falsified? Because a country highly dependent on export and weak consumption power, 18 trillion seems sus. Yeah, no, 18 trillion is definitely a fake number. Because, so what happens with Chinese export data is that they don't look at so once the shipment leaves Chinese ports, right? So once they leave that, they mark it down as export numbers. It doesn't really matter if those products end up being sold or not. They just only mark the exit data, right? So they keep tallying the number of shipments out of China. And that's not a real effective revenue, but it doesn't matter because it's out of China. So they consider those for export data. And so China's export data, imports data, they're all fake. You can't really trust those numbers. Red Pasta asks, is China anything like the entertainment industry wants its international audience to believe? Yeah, well, China spends a lot of effort on Hollywood, and this is no stranger. I mean, you have people who worked on Iron Man 3 exposed that to saying basically, in order to film in China, well, they spend a lot of money on to produce a film, right? And part of those terms for negotiation is that part of the film has to be taking place in China to show off, the beautiful skylines of Shanghai, or how Chinese actresses have to be in the film. And it's a slow process because fundamentally over time, as many films paint China as a great country, you start to think so, and it's like over time, it's a slow process. But in the end, right, I think the point is China is just a facade for all the good things. The real people that live in China and everybody around China realize that what they display on film is nothing like that of real China. So if you impose tariffs on all 400 plus product, right? Obviously, that's, yeah, no, I understand what you mean. But what I'm saying is that with China, if you don't do something drastic with the government, that is, right, they will find ways to claw back. If you really think about one of the issues with the Trump phase one trade deal was that China never really followed any of it, right? And then when COVID hit, they just basically ignored it. When you give China any breathing room, this is like, I'm not saying that, whether Trump or Biden is doing really poorly, like they're doing the best that they can, in my opinion. Fundamentally, I just think that there's still a reluctance to fully go against China because, yeah, there's so many other considerations. And, when it comes to the current economy, you could do this because back in the days there wasn't so much, price hikes and stuff like that. Today, obviously, it's different. So I just think that fundamentally there needs to be a better understanding across both type of administration, that you have to consider, is this for a political reason or is this for you actually want to compete against China? Because I think if you don't do it completely, it won't be effective. And also, Vader, I'm not saying you put the tariffs on all 400 plus product. I'm saying that the imported goods that you do choose, it has to be some level of effectiveness that you can back up with, providing the. I don't think, like you're mentioning the inflation stuff, right? That makes sense, but I don't think it's going to significantly increase it to the point where that it's going to, because a lot of this has to do with the domestic economy. So that's why during the Trump administration you could do it, because back then the inflation wasn't so bad, but today you can't do it anymore. So I understand that point, but I don't think it will significantly increase daily prices. Because what you're doing is, if you think about the other side, things that are made in China is already driving out domestic competitions. So it fundamentally comes down to whether you want a short-term hardship or you want a long-term hardship. And you've had so many years where Chinese products It's already destroying American manufacture. And so it's not like you're already not experiencing hardship to begin with. I think the thing about Chinese imports now to America, following not zero COVID, following like COVID, is the strategic relocation of certain things, right? I think without China, because back in the days it used to be China was everything. Today is different. Yeah, Kenneth Lee raised an important point. You have other countries like Vietnam, India, Mexico, and others. They might not be the 100% replacement of China. They can fulfill like 70 to 80%. I think that's good enough. Chip Satin says, is Xi similar to Putin in the sense that the only way to make him stop is to step up to him with negotiations only happening if they need to buy time? I think pretty much you cannot fight a strong man with weakness. You have to fight him against fight. You basically have to fight him with the same level of strength. Is your channel your full-time job or do you have other income streams? I do this full-time. Out of context, but do you make enough to support a healthy lifestyle currently? Totally understandable if you don't want to answer, just curious. What do you mean by a healthy lifestyle? If you mean I'm not eating McDonald's every day, I am. But if you mean like I'm eating everything organic, I'm not, I don't really, I never follow that trend of eating organic. But I mean, it just, like, to me, it doesn't really make sense to pay $7 for, $7 more for like, a dozen of eggs compared to like $3 eggs or something like that. I don't know. I one time I went to Whole Foods last year, I think. There was like a crazy shortage of eggs. So a dozen of eggs was like $12 or something like that, or $15. It was crazy. Omar says you will upload this live as a video. Maybe, maybe not. You can still find the replay on the live section. What's your stance on the Hamas and Israeli conflict? Are you pro-Palestinian or pro-Israel, and why? I think so. I don't really have a stance because for me, I feel like people underestimate. Uh, so whether you're pro Palestine or pro Israel, you're underestimating like the suffering of the other side, right? Like regardless which side you're on. So for me, I would say that obviously the October 7th attack from Hamas was wrong, and it's wrong for them to use civilian buildings and civilian structures as basis for the terrorist organization to do like other underground tunnels in Gaza and all that. But I also think like there's clearly a need to address the amount of suffering that regular people in Gaza has experienced. I think that's also another objective fact. Now, when it comes to like, do people in Gaza support Hamas? I think many have reported that they do. And does that mean though that they should be suffering a war that was, caused by a terrorist group? So I think if I say I'm pro-Palestine or pro-Israel, I don't think I can really answer that question. But I feel like at the end of the day, I think we have to kind of just objectively look at what's the fact, call them out as it is, and move on from that. So I don't really think there's a supporting for me. Chip Satin says, do you think China has any views, interest in the 2023 Israel-Hamas conflict? China definitely supports Palestine, and the relationship with China and Israel has deteriorated again. So they've decided to abandon that. For a very long time, Israel and China were super close. And now it seems they're doing everything the opposite way. David C says, can you explain your background, your story? Sick name, by the way, first name. Oh yeah, thanks, David. David is a great name. Well, my background is I basically I came out to the West when I was 11, and I grew up around people who talked about a lot of China's political stuff. So I was very interested in it. So I basically got to start working and started this channel 2 years ago to kind of focus on something I find fascinating. Basically, I find China quite fascinating, and it's something that I have a bit of expertise on. So I just decided to pursue this. What is the legendary Jinkala fertilizer? Let's see. Is this like some copy pasta stuff or? Oh no, it's a Jinkella is actually a. This is what it is. It's an American fertilizer that's been. So apparently, this is some like memes that's made popular in China, right? You can buy this fertilizer in China, but it's made in America. Buzzboy says, first time I've caught your stream, so I wanted to ask, cold or hot shower? Hot water for shower. I can't take a cold shower, so don't most people shower with hot water? Vader says, healthy, I meant a good and sustainable lifestyle financially. Yeah, I think so. That seems like, yeah, it must be a really old meme, man. Man, this is like some really, really old footage, it seems. What is this? It's like the reverse of the Little John. No, this is not the Green Goblin in Spider-Man. Like this is some 2003 level of resolution. Omar asks, by which criteria the Chinese government invests in the Chinese automotive sector and beyond? Do they really succeed in pushing Chinese companies toward higher productivity and higher value-added production? That's a really great question. So Chinese EVs, it's a state policy to grow the Chinese electrical vehicle industry. And so every company in China will like try to do a startup on EVs. Those that make it big receive attention from the government, like BYD, like Xiaomi, that will be funded further because they are now a part of the campaign to export those EVs across the world. And so they become an important state asset that the Chinese government values. And so you kind of have to become a really important, successful story first, and then you get noticed by the government, or that the government, like some people in the government, funded this thing to begin with, like BYD. And then so it already starts out on the wrong footing. In terms of like helping the government, of course. Hey man, many people find it reassuring to have a very controlling society, like a lot of public video surveillance in the streets, very low crime rate, good public education. Why would they change? Are you referring to China? Because China has a really high crime rate. There's stabbings and, public rampage every single day. Their surveillance camera, they've never used it toward catching bad people. They've really used it toward just preventing good people from speaking out, like trying to protest. Chip asks, do you believe that the West should completely ban Chinese EV imports and sales? I think, from a strategic perspective, I think they should. From a very, very, consumer perspective, it's a complicated issue because some people like they can't afford a Tesla, and you offer them like a $30,000 EV from BYD. Like it's very appealing to them. But I just say that price isn't always the factor that we should consider. We should consider other things like national security risks, the overall competition. Like most cases, Chinese EVs will drive out the domestic markets and their brands, and so it's dangerous for the overall trend of the economy. So the negatives outweigh the positives in most cases. But the only thing is, from a consumer's perspective, Chinese EVs are very attractive. All right, I think I'm going to end the stream right here. I'm going to go grab some lunch now. Hope you guys have a great rest of your Saturday, and we'll see you around the same time next week. All right, take care. Bye-bye.